Good evening and welcome, everyone. You are tuning in at home. You are watching the Board of Finance budget hearing. This is our second meeting with the Board of Education. Today is, I think it's Thursday, March 18th, 2021. If you would just join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm Lainey McHugh, and I'm the chair of the Board of Finance. I do want to tell everybody that we have two full screens of participants this evening active within the meeting itself, and people watching live on Facebook as well, and some attendees. If you could remember to use the raise your hand feature, and if you haven't done so, please click on your name and add what board you're with. We have members of the Board of Finance and our alternates this evening, the Director of Finance, our town, our town hall officials from the First Selectman's office, as well as members of the Board of Education and the Business Administration staff over at Long Hill. We also have members of the Town Council Finance Committee on the call this evening as well. Okay, so how would we like to do this? Dr. Semmel, can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
All right, I can. So how would you like to do this evening? Would you like to start with some remarks, some follow-up, and then go through the questions that we had left over from our last meeting? Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right, sir, it's all yours.
All right, so first of all, I want to thank everybody for giving us a chance to come back this evening and continue to, encourage you to consider funding the full request from the Board of Education at 3.81%. I do just have 3 slides to start, and then be happy to answer any questions. So Michelle's going to share the screen. On the second slide, I just want to go over something that we did a lot of slides last time. I'm not going to go over all of those, but in terms of where our request is, we know the Board of Education's request is 3.81%. Last time as we spoke, we talked about a transportation cliff, the magnet school tuition, and the special revenue account, all being pretty special issues for this particular year. And if you subtract those percentages off of our 3.81%, you actually see that our request is quite reasonable at 2.35%. And furthermore, if you take off the $300,000 that the town will start receiving from the Bridgeport magnet school tuition, you see that's another reduction of 0.28%. For some rounding errors, the final request, as we kind of see it, as 2.08%. We, of course, know that our actual request is 3.81, but we think it's important to see that when you take off those particular numbers, you do get down to close to a 2% increase, which is very, very reasonable. And if we didn't have to deal with these other issues, our request would be very reasonable. Now, on the third page, I do just want to go over a couple of quick items, just making sure you understand what an impact of a 3% budget increase could look like for the Trumbull Public Schools moving forward. First, I want to talk about the fact that we lost a number of math and literacy specialists going into the 2021 year, and they've definitely had an impact on our schools. Not everybody understands everything that a math or literacy specialists do, and I can tell you, they add that 10 times value. And as I sort of joke here, they're worth their weight in Bitcoin. First of all, these specialists help all of our teachers. So they help make sure that the teaching and the instruction in the classroom is top notch. These folks are at the top of their game, and they support staff trying to make sure all the instructional strategies are at the top notch level. But they also help students. They not only help students who are falling behind, but they help students who need enrichment. Furthermore, they do work with the school leadership to make sure that the work moving forward is focused on that increased instruction and curriculum work. So they play a big role in that piece too. So they, especially at the elementary level, they create a very solid foundation for our learners. And if you don't have enough of them, all they can do is put out fires. And that's currently where we're at, where they're only able to do kind of the bare minimum of what we're talking about. So if we only have the 3% budget increase, we're likely not going to be able to add those specialists. And I gotta tell you, in my 25 years as an educator, math and literacy specialists can be one of the most powerful things that you have in your district. So that would be a true loss if we can't continue to build a little bit back into 21, 22. Also, class sizes is another thing that lots of parents tend to get concerned about. With a 3% budget increase, the fact that we have to cut a number of positions across the district, we may not cut teaching positions, but we would have no flexibility in order to add teaching sections. Therefore, if we do get a number of students moving in, we will not be able to hire staff to try to keep class sizes where parents traditionally expect them and are at the most advantageous level. So I think it's important to note that that could be a significant issue. We also know that we're looking for a director of human resources. Keep in mind, we have 1,000 employees that work for the Trumbull Public Schools and no director of HR. So the exposure that we have to places like EEO or CHRO are significant. And we actually have 5 groups, union groups, to actually negotiate this spring. So that's a significant workload as well. So currently, myself has to work in the capacity of the HR director, in addition to all the other work that needs to get done. I don't believe that this is sustainable and that we need to absolutely be looking to add a director of HR, but unfortunately, a 3% increase would likely mean no director of HR added. The same would be true for the director of operations. We used to have 3 people working in that capacity. We actually only have 1 person working in that office at this time. And the way we organize the director of operations, if we don't get that position, the town should not be looking for us to do any long-range planning. We do not have the staff to do it. John Morello has done amazing work this year, but again, it's not sustainable. So I wouldn't expect any kind of long-range planning. We would simply only be able to focus on projects revolving around safety. And then finally, we would need to reduce monies out of curriculum and instruction. So professional development for our teachers that is needed on a yearly basis, and work on curriculum would be eliminated. So additional courses, things that we're trying to bring onto into our coursework would not occur. So I just wanted to give you a little flavor of what a 3% budget increase would mean. If we get less than 3%, obviously there would be additional losses, but that's just a high level discussion of what potential could happen. So you did ask us 17 questions after our first go round, and we provided the responses to those questions on Tuesday. And we'd be happy to either discuss some of those questions or answer any additional questions that you have. And then I hope I do just get a couple of minutes at the very end to make any final comments.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm looking I don't see any hands right this moment. So what I'd like to do is go to the questions that we had sent over and go through the document, the answers that were provided. If we could run through that really quickly, would that be okay? Just to make sure we're all on the same page with clarification.
Sure, it might just be best if there is additional questioning that someone raises that instead of just reading our responses, right?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to do. So let me go to my board members also, and just remember I'm flipping screens here, so it just takes me a moment. I have an additional question. We had asked some questions about what your projected spend was. I sat in with a great meeting with Mark Mascola and Mr. Hendrickson on, I think it was Tuesday. I'm losing track of the days of the week already. And we kind of walked through it a little bit. I did have a follow-up question as to in which accounts do you see that there will be surplus? So more specifically, I know we talked about a reserve for negotiation account. I'm not looking to talk about that. I'm looking to talk more about what other areas you're seeing surplus in at the moment.
Right now, there looks to be a surplus of a couple $100,000 in health benefits, a couple $100,000 in outplaced tuition, and as you mentioned, in some of the salary accounts, probably substitutes and paras. However, we don't have a real run rate on them since they aren't salaried. They're on timesheets. And you mentioned that reserve for negotiations, which is $1.45 million. There was no backup for that in the business office when I arrived, so I can't place what that is attributable to. It was pointed out that it might have been a reserve for teachers or FTEs that were added back post-budget. We provided you on the attachment the list of 6 FTEs, which that money may have been budgeted for, but at this time, I don't see any need for that.
I have a question on the outplaced tuition. I'm assuming that might go best to Tammy Hartman. So the outplaced tuition savings, the surplus that you're seeing, is it because of COVID that people are coming back in from those outplacements, or reorganization in your department?
Neither of those. What it has to do with more so is we're looking at developing capacity within the district to bring students back as much as possible. Sometimes students are more ready to come back, and part of it, quite frankly, is the luck of the draw. We have been able to bring back some students simply because we had the capacity and the ability to educate them here. We've had some students go out, but as many of you likely know, I have an example of a child that's being adopted will be coming into the district sometime in the fall. I don't know if that student's going to be able to be managed here. So part of it is purposeful planning and looking at building the capacity within the district. Part of it is simply the nature of how people moved in or moved out of the district for this school year.
Okay. Can everybody hear Tammy okay? I'm having a little bit trouble. I think it's just a little bit echoey.
No,
Did everybody get
here?
Okay. Tammy, can you just back up just a little bit? Phyllis, is that why you have your hand up?
Back up from the computer a little bit.
Okay, I can back. I've had ongoing issues with my microphone, so is that any better?
Much better, thank you.
Okay, so so to answer your question in regards to the change in tuition lines, it really does not have anything to do with COVID. It simply is part of ongoing work to develop capacity within the district to better manage students with extending behaviors or needs as need be, and we've been able to do that and educate those children. Part of it, quite frankly, is due to some luck. Sometimes we have no control over families with students with highly complex needs moving into the district and having to meet those needs. So we're working very hard at ensuring that we have the capacity to be
Does anybody else have any questions on outplaced tuition, special education in regards to the budgeting going forward next year and the possible surplus this year? Okay, Marty Isaac?
Thank you, Marty Isaac from the Board of Finance. So I just want to make sure I understand. First of all, I think it's fantastic news to hear that there's going to be an estimated $2 million surplus. Our surprises often go the other way, so I'm very happy to hear that there's a $2 million surplus. I notice in your answer to number one that you indicate that you're going to use that surplus to reduce or eliminate the deficits in the special revenue accounts and the lunch account. Can you be specific on what are the balances today, and will that $2 million completely cover those deficits?
The deficit to date was in all the 205 accounts or special revenue funds was $444,000. But however, there is still money coming in from tuition from TechEc on a monthly basis, and the voluntary insurance is self-liquidating. And so I estimate that will be probably $200,000 in deficit at year end.
That's the 205 account, 220,000 at year end is what you're estimating?
200,000.
200,000. And what are you estimating for the lunch account to be in deficit at year end?
The lunch account for this year through the month of February is in deficit 530,000. In the month of February, the deficit only grew by $8,507. So that decreased from $20,207 last month, and in December, the deficit was $96,000. So we are making progress and hopefully bottoming out in terms of increasing the deficit in the lunch account.
I'm sorry, when you said the deficit this year, that confuses me a little because when we started the year, it was already in deficit. So can you just give me one number at the end of June, your estimate of the full deficit, whether it was before this year, happened last year, the total deficit in the lunch account will be what?
About $2.4 million.
Okay, so the deficit is 2.4 million. So 2.4 million in the lunch account, 220,000 in the special revenue account. So or 200,000. So we're at 2.6 million deficit.
Yes.
And is the commitment to use the $2 million surplus to close that deficit?
I can't speak for the board, but that would be my recommendation.
Can the board speak to that? Because the board is here.
I'm here. We did not discuss that as a board, but we will listen to the recommendation. That sounds okay to me personally, but there are 6 other people that need to agree to that.
And I would also just point out, Mr. Isaac, that, that's the current belief about what our surplus is going to be. So, it is March, so we're getting closer to the end of the year. But until we get to the end of the year, you can't be sure what your surplus is going to be. So I just want to make that clear as well.
Agreed. Yeah, no, it's merely more a matter of intent. As we are doing our budgeting, I think it's important that we understand your intent. So I'd say for me personally, I won't speak for the rest of the board, how I vote on the budget this year will be dependent on your response to that question. And I know you have another board meeting coming up prior to our vote. So I would just stress to you that however the board is going to respond to that will impact votes on the Board of Finance on what I will be doing for my vote on April 1st. So I just wanted to be clear about that. And while we're on the subject of deficits, I just also, to remove any ambiguity, I want to make sure I understand the position of the administrators and the position of the board on deficit spending. Can you clarify what the position will be moving forward for both the administrators and what the board position will be with regard to deficit spending?
Yes, absolutely. And I can tell you that, Paul and I, we work together in Plymouth and we're working together here. Deficit spending is something that should definitely not occur. We have a belief that there should be no deficit spending. The money that is given to us for our budget is the money that we should stay within in terms of spending. And that's how we will continuously run. And if we do run into situations where something, perhaps an out of placement special education situation, we would have to come back to the Board of Finance and make it very clear why we might be going towards deficit. So we would make it very clear and ask for a special appropriation. We hope that doesn't happen, but we cannot predict on a yearly basis. But from a purely, to answer your question, we will not, from the administration standpoint, be recommending any kind of deficit spending.
Well, I'd like to say thank you. That's incredibly important point from my perspective, and I appreciate the testimony with regard to that. I'd ask the board now, because at the end of the day, while I appreciate your intent, the board is responsible for compliance and other elements. So I just would like to make sure from the board perspective, there is a similar sentiment. Can the board comment with regard to deficit spending? Is this an accepted practice or no longer will be an accepted practice?
I'm going to agree with Marty.
You agree that, okay, that's great to hear that the board and the administrators agree that there will no longer be permitted deficit spending. I think that's terrific for the town, and I appreciate both of you sharing that publicly.
You're welcome.
Lainey, you're muted.
Ladies, on mute.
Sorry, trying to keep the dog from barking. Two hands are raised. I'm going to go to Mark Mascola and then Tony Sinto.
Hey, Dr. Semmel and Paul, thanks again for coming here this evening. Can you put up the chart that you had originally that kind of walked the 3.81 down? Those two, I'm trying to remember the three or so negative, one was transportation and I can't remember what the other two were.
Yeah. Can you see those now, Mark?
Yeah, I can. So Marty asked about the lunch account and the other. Is any of that, the accounts that Marty asked about, reflected in that special revenue account adjustment?
What's in that special revenue account is for the strings and band program, and it's also for our inter district, and it's actually for lunch as well. So it's those three items. It was $430,000.
But to the extent that the lunch program turns around and we get the students back full-time, there's a strong possibility that given the actions we've taken and the increased student participation, we could turn a profit in the lunch program.
Mark, is
Okay,
that
so
430 that for 430 that you're looking at? Is that to mitigate deficits moving forward?
Correct. Yeah, we have anticipated what our deficits would be in each of those three accounts. Part of the reason why the
For next year.
For next year, correct. So it's just
Okay, got it.
Yeah, it's eliminating future deficits because of what we're predicting out in terms of what the deficits would be if we didn't put this money in.
I understand now. That's helpful. Okay, that makes sense. And so really important, I guess, to try to continue, as I know you guys are doing an excellent job of keeping tightening the purse strings from now through the end of the year, to allow the surplus to materialize such that you can wipe out the prior year deficits. So I got that. That's helpful. I was confused. I just wanted to make sure I understood the difference between this 430 and what we just talked about. I'm good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Tony, and then I see Christine and Michael. Did you have your hand up and put it down?
They got me right at the end. They got my question, so I'm good.
Awesome, thank you. Tony?
Thanks, Laney. This is Tony Cinto. Dr. Semo, I just want to review the numbers that you went over with Marty, if you don't mind, because I just make sure I didn't miss anything. I wrote them down, so let me just double check what I wrote. You said you have a projected surplus of $2 million.
Actually, that was Mr. Hendrickson speaking.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Because we can't really see you guys. It's like a satellite photo. You guys are way far away. Oh, there you go. So, okay. Sorry. So it was, you have a projected surplus of 2 million. You have, and you have a projected decrease of 2.6 million. So at least 600,000 still. Did I get those numbers correct?
Yes, however, let me give a little more to that. It's a projected surplus of at least 2 million.
Correct.
And to elaborate on the lunch account, it's $2.4 million in deficit. However, at the Finance Committee of the Board of Education this afternoon, it was approved for forwarding to the Board of Education a transfer of $500,000 from the lunch balance sheet to the town to help liquidate part of that $2.4 million deficit, which shows our intent. I went back, I guess in previous years, it had been a pattern to monthly transfer money to the town. That practice had been suspended, and the balance of cash had built up to roughly $1 million. And now it was too much to keep on hand, especially given the situation. So a vote was taken this afternoon with that committee, and it will be recommended to the board this coming Tuesday at their meeting.
Okay, so in a worst case scenario, what's your deficit going to be if everything goes? I mean, obviously the best case scenario is you're at zero. What's your worst case scenario?
2.4 minus $500,000 equals 1.9, plus the 200,000 equals 2.1. Looks pretty close.
So hopefully you'll be zero.
Yes.
Okay, so super. Thanks. Sorry, I got you guys mixed up.
I have a question for you, Paul. Do you have a schedule? Can you put that schedule up on the screen for the lunch account? Maria had a question on it.
I don't have that with me. I'm sorry, Lane.
But that's okay. Can you send that schedule over after the meeting?
Sure.
Hey, Laney, can I just follow up one question if you don't mind?
Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. Is the lunch so high because the kids aren't in school and they're coming to the school to get the lunch? Is that why it's abnormal? Or is this like a normal, is this normal?
So, yeah, because the kids have not been coming to go through the lines to purchase food, that's where we started being at a loss, because we still have our expenses for the food service.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Which is why we've been encouraging our families to take the meals, because every meal we give away, we get fully reimbursed by the USDA at a profit to our expense. So
Gotcha. Okay.
We've been able to reduce that from, big losses of $90,000 a month down to this past month of $8,000 loss. So I do want to appreciate the food service program for really pushing the food. And I want to appreciate our families for getting it, because it's helping out.
Okay. Thanks, guys. That was super. Thanks for explaining that. Thank you.
Okay, so Christine and Elaine both have their hands up, and I'm going to go to them next. And then we'll come back. I have a couple questions more about some stimulus funds. Christine? Christine, are you frozen? Okay, Christine, I'm going to skip over to Elaine and come back to you because you're having some technical difficulties. Elaine?
Yeah, hi. First of all, the 2 slides that you showed in the beginning, is it possible for you to send those to us, please?
Yeah, and actually, if you go to our website, I had them placed on our website. So if you go under budget,
Okay.
under the Board of Education part of the tab on our website, you should be able to scroll down and see tonight's presentation near the bottom.
Okay, thank you. Now, my question is, are there any other revenues that you expect from the state or the federal government under the new COVID rules or COVID guidelines? I know you mentioned in answer to the question about any loss of learning the students have suffered, that you would be relying on some of the ESSER II grants and the American Recovery money, but is there other money you might expect to get? And do you know how much you're getting in that grant and the American Recovery Act?
So I don't believe there's a talk of a third source of money. So right now we believe it's the ESSER II and the American Recoveries Act. I always get that mixed up if I'm saying that wrong. It's approximately $700,000 in the ESSER II, and it's approximately, what we're seeing is about 1.7 million from the American Recoveries Act, but I want to make sure I make it clear that ESSER II, you're supposed to spend through September of 2023. So it's a multi-year grant because they understand that you don't just improve student loss over just a few months. And the American Recovery Act is actually through 2024. So again, multi-year grants, but I don't know of any additional money at this time. Those are the ones.
Are there specific items you can use those two grants on?
You know, I don't know enough yet about the most recent one, the 1.7. So I can't really speak to that yet. But the ESSER II, it's mostly supposed to be for remediation and for social emotional learning. Those are the two kind of bigger buckets that we're expecting to use it for.
Okay. All right. And if the American Recovery Act, the 1.7, have you identified how you want to use that?
We don't know quite the rules yet, so it's hard to identify. Right now, we have to put a plan together for the state for the ESSER II grant. So we're working on that. And it's, like I said, remediation and social emotional learning.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Yep.
I have a follow-up question to that. So the SR2, is that the same as the CRF funds? There's a lot of letters and numbers.
No, it's not. So
Okay, so CRF funds were coming in two batches. You got a first allotment from the CRF, and how much that was in how much?
About $1 million we already received.
And what do you expect for the second allotment?
That's the same amount.
Yeah, it's about the same. The total grant was about $2.1 million.
Okay, so it looks like you're looking at like 3.4 million in grant money to still come in, correct?
Well, yeah, but the CRF funds have all been spoken for. We had to spend money by December 31st of 2020. So we're now just waiting to actually receive that money. So that's,
okay. It would be helpful. I had a request that if you could put the grants that you've received, if you could just give us a one-page schedule of just what's coming in, what's already been received. It doesn't have to be more detailed than that. That would be helpful for us to understand.
sure.
Okay, thank you. Christine, are you back with us?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Okay, good. Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry that my internet got wonky just then, just as you were calling on me. Just to change topics or to circle back just a tiny bit on the lunch accounts for this year. Paul, you had said something that I just wanted to see if you could elaborate on just a little bit about it. Turning around as more kids come in person, right? So elementary will be on Wednesdays starting next week, yay. And I keep encouraging my own elementary kids to take the lunch and not ask me to pack anything. But do you feel, I just was wondering if you could just share how confident you are that as more and more kids are in person more frequently, that that'll just really level out. It sounds a really great trajectory. Just wanted to understand your confidence level, if you will.
That would be pure speculation, but the more students we get taking lunch, the deficit would close. Because right now, we're getting reimbursement from the state to cover, but to cover our revenue loss, but that only generates a gross margin, and the gross margin isn't sufficient enough to cover our fixed costs such as wages and health benefits. And so we need, I believe it's 2,700 student lunches to break even. But that was pre-COVID, and it will recalibrate once we get everybody back in school. And to give you an off-the-cuff answer now would be premature.
And just, I do want to add a little bit if I could. One of the reasons we've been able to drop the loss is because we were able to start giving away meals on weekends and on like vacations. So these are extra days that we've been able to give away this food. So when we give away food on a Friday for the entire weekend, that allows us to reduce that loss. So I believe that's the biggest thing that we've been able to do. And so when kids start to come back, I'm not 100% confident we'll level out to zero. It all depends on a la carte sales. If they go up and buy those ice creams, if they go up and buy the things that are
Oh, I know my kids buy the ice creams. I'm just saying.
right? So send them with some extra money and you can help us. It's those higher margined items that we've definitely lost out on this year because you can't buy a la carte, when you're picking them up at the schools. So I don't know. I can't say I'm super confident that we'll drop below that 8,000. We're very happy that the loss has gotten to that point. I just wanted to point out that it's those Saturday, Sunday meals over the vacations. That's been a tremendous help because it doesn't take any extra worker hours to do that.
Thanks.
Just one quick follow-up on that. If you could explain a little bit more. You said that you're making a $500,000 transfer to the town for the lunch accounts, but I'm not sure how that works. Can you explain that, clarify that for us? I think that's for Paul.
Yeah, there's a there's a due from account and our due to account in our balance sheet on the school lunch shows $2.4 million. That's available on our website under the February financials.
Okay. Any other questions on the lunch accounts or the 205 accounts? Marty.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. I guess I didn't understand that there the due to accounts. Maybe I'm not following it exactly, and I appreciate that the showing the intent of transferring the 500,000. Is there, in essence, there's a balance sheet over there? What's the remaining balance? I guess I'd ask it that way. If you guys made the decision to transfer 500,000, I understand that. If you were going to max that out, what could you transfer? Or what's left on the balance sheet? Maybe I'll say it that way.
There was $1 million in cash.
Can you say that again? I didn't hear.
There is $1 million in cash.
I see.
You need to transfer 500,000 at this time. And based on progress, we will transfer more as the balance warrants.
And the 500,000 is the comfortable margin so that you can run the lunch program is.
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
Marty, I just want you to know that at the meeting this afternoon, I did not understand what the due to accounts were. Peg Brindisi is here and she had a good explanation for us and everyone understood. Maybe Peg, you should give that explanation so they know what that is. Thank you.
Yes, please. Peg? Hold on. You should unmute, Peg.
Okay.
Oh, maybe
Okay.
not.
We don't. Mark. Good.
You guys have too many microphones open.
Just use the mic in the room, I think, Peg.
Use the mic.
Use your microphone. Pull it closer.
Hello.
Be glad.
Yes. Mary, do you remember back over the summer when we had the discussion about salaries being paid out of school lunch and that it rose as the salaries were being paid? The cash wasn't being paid out of the school lunch, it was being paid out of the general fund, and that created a due to, due from, which is why school lunches due to would be raised. So we're at a level now, and we can pay that back to the tune of 500,000. And if we do that, we take the cash in on the general fund. So when I go to do a cash request from Anthony Musto next week, if I move the 500, I get to lower my cash request by the 500,000. So the money stays within the board. It goes over from school lunches cash account. They literally have their own cash account with People's, and it goes over to the general fund. But what happens is it alters the cash request I'll be asking for to the tune of 500,000. It'll take that away.
Maybe what would help is help people understand the 2.4 million deficit and the balance sheet of 1 million, how the interplay between those two.
Every week, school lunch has their salaries. And as they get paid, the due to the town goes higher. So we have this balance that I reconcile every single month, and I make sure those two amounts are receivable from school lunch and the payable from school lunch. Receivable on the general fund matches the payable on the school lunch. So at that time, though, Betty's taking in more money, all this revenue, but she's not paying out the salaries because that's a due to, due from. So she's got her cash being raised, and now we've got 1 million. She doesn't need 1 million. She only needs about 500. So we're going to take 500,000 and apply that over to the general fund. If she had been paying for her salaries, she would have 0 cash. But because she doesn't pay for her salaries, it's a due to, due from. That's why the fund goes higher and higher and higher.
So just if we held the money at 1 million before you did the 500,000, and what you mentioned previously, or Paul mentioned previously, that the account was in deficit by 2.4 million. Am I correct to think that if it's really 3.4 million, but there's $1 million on hand, so that's why it's 2.4 million, or I shouldn't think of it that way?
It's Mark. Hey,
Yeah.
it's Mark. So Peg, I'm looking at the school lunch financials that were in this afternoon's package that's on the website. And so I see the cash of $1.1 million. So if I just look at the school lunch balance sheet, right? If I take cash and I just reduce a payable, right? I don't think that in and of itself has any impact, unless I'm mistaken, on the fund balance, on the equity within the lunch account. I'm reducing assets and I'm reducing liabilities by an equal amount, and my fund balance, I think, doesn't really change by doing that. Now, the general account goes up by 500 and their payable goes down by, and the receivable goes down by 500. Again, net should be net neutral to the equity, right? Correct?
Right.
So I don't quite understand how the 500 reduces the deficit. And also when I look at I look at the sheet from this afternoon, it looks like the fund balance is negative 1.1. So I don't know how that correlates to the 2.4 that we talked about previously.
Right. So what you're doing is you're just moving the balance sheet. When we give you guys or when we pay that 500,000, it's literally all balance sheet moves. So you're not adjusting that $1 million in the fund balance. You still-
Agreed.
Exactly. You've got it now.
So, but how does that 1.1 reconcile to the 2.4 that we just talked about? Because that's the other piece I didn't understand.
So basically, if you took all of her cash and paid off all of the due to others, that's pretty much your fund balance, except for a few more payables. Deferred revenue and payables of total 240,000. So,
right.
So your fund balance, your negative 1 million is your due to less your cash, is basically what it is.
No, I know, I got that. I'm just trying to understand how the 1.1 negative fund balance, which to me is the deficit of 1.1, and maybe this is just words and nomenclature, how that relates to the 2.4 deficit. It may be they're two different things.
Mark, I think this is Marty Isaac. I think what I'm hearing them say is there's a 1.1 million deficit, plus they owed the town $1 million, plus there's apparently another few hundred thousand owed to another party, which is the 2.4. I don't have the sheet in front of me, but hearing the numbers, I'm surmising that's what they're saying. Maybe we could put the document up so we can, somebody could just walk us through so there's ambiguity.
Yeah, I'm struggling, Marty, with that one, but again, it could just be my lack of knowledge.
I think it's a little bit hard to follow this way. Do you have something in writing we can put on the screen, Paul or Peg?
You guys have words?
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
We're going to try to put this.
I think it was slide 28 from this after, or page 28 in the package from today.
Michelle's going to try to get Michelle.
You have to just tell me where it is.
Page 28 in the middle.
You have to tell me where's the document.
I have it on my screen.
I don't know if
you want me to share
I'm
it?
sorry, Scott, did you say you have it? Do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I was gonna say the same thing, Scott, if you got it, or I can share it, so just let me know.
I think somebody's sharing it already.
Yeah, this is Scott Kerr from the Board of Education. Thank you,
Do you
Scott.
see the school lunch financials now?
Yes, and we can hear you quite well.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay, so I won't narrate it, I'll just display it.
Okay.
So when I read this, and this is where I need some help, what this says to me is I got assets of 1.5, which includes $1 million of cash, and I have liabilities of 2.5, which includes the 2.4 that is owed to others. So net, I have a negative equity balance or a deficit in my equity account of 1.1 million. That's how I read this page, but again, that's just me. And so I was trying to understand that fund balance, 1.1, to the 2.4 deficit that was talked about when we were discussing where we thought the deficit would end at the end of the year. And I just couldn't figure out the math.
Well, if you look at Betty's cash and receivables, she's at 1.5. If she took all of those assets, and like you said, then you get that fund balance. And that's
I'm sorry, Peg.
Yes.
Peg, it's really hard to hear you.
It's really hard to hear you. Yeah.
Peg, you have to pull it right up to your mouth.
Okay. So you have the due to the town of the 2.4.
I see it. Yep.
Right. But she's got $1 million in cash, but she can't give you all that. We can only give you 500.
I got it. I understand the math. I'm just trying to understand. If you took all your assets
Right.
and you paid off all your liabilities,
Right.
you couldn't do it. You would be short $1.1 million, right? So someone would have to make up that deficit of $1.1 million if you were to pay all your liabilities.
That's
All I'm
correct.
trying to understand is how does the $1.1 million deficit that is on this page, we talked before about, we thought the deficit by the end of the year in the lunch account would be 2.4 million. What I don't understand is how I go from 1.1 of a liability of a deficit to 2.4 million of a deficit by the end of the year. And that's what I'm trying to understand. The 2.4 that was mentioned by Paul a few minutes ago. And so is it the loss for the current year that hasn't been added to the fund balance yet? So it hasn't rolled?
That's the 2.4, it's to liquidate the 2.4 due to the town.
Yeah, but that's not the deficit though, right? In other words, the fund balance is only in deficit 1.1 million.
That's what we owe to them, and that's what we want to liquidate.
This is
That's
Marty.
not a deficit. Yeah, go ahead, Marty.
This is Marty Isaac. I just want to make, I agree with what you're saying, Mark. It's as of 2/28, it was in, the fund balance is in deficit by 1.1 million. Paul, maybe you can just clarify on the bottom of the sheet where it talks about the decrease in fund balance of the 530,000. Is that embedded already in the numbers into the balance sheet above, or do you roll that in later? Is that 530 already included in the balance sheet number?
Yes, it is.
Okay, well, I guess to me, it feels like good news again, because it feels like the total deficit for the account is you owe the town 2.4, understand that, but the fund balance itself is only in deficit 1.1 million. So you can clear that with 1.1 million additional, you could clear it because you have $1 million there. I understand you want to keep an operating cash on hand of $500,000. And I don't think, there's this rush to say you got to clear the 2.4 with the town right away, although I'll let others in the town comment on that. My concern is the deficit on the account, and instead of 2.4 million, it looks like as of today, it's 1.1, and maybe you're projecting by the end of the year, because people aren't buying as many lunches, it's going to continue to grow. And maybe that's going to increase somewhat, but it doesn't seem like it's going to get to 2.4. So I understand what Mark is saying. That makes more sense to me, but maybe you can clarify for both of us.
Well, it's correct. And what I wanted to do was liquidate our due to the town of 2.4.
I see.
Yeah, and Paul, that makes sense. I mean, so in theory, I think what you would say is, look, I'm going to use 500 of my cash on hand.
Yeah.
That'll bring me down to 1.9 of what I owe. It's not really my deficit, but if I can inject some additional cash from the general fund because I'm running a surplus into the account, I can clear the payable and actually leave myself with a positive, not just zero fund balance, but actually a positive fund balance in the lunch account, right? I think is what you're saying, but I'm not. That's what it sounds like.
Well, that was easy.
Yeah, I think, thank you, Scott, for putting that up. Are you guys good with that sheet right now?
I am, thank you.
Okay, yeah, the audio is really hard. So if you guys can really make sure with the microphones, this is why when there's a lot of people on the call, it's really helpful if everybody's at their own station. Now, Michael Barker has his hand up, but I have one quick question about the COVID related expenses before we move on. Are you okay with that, Michael? Okay, so with the grants that you talked about, have all of your COVID expenses been reimbursed to date? And if not, how much has not, and what do you anticipate is not going to be reimbursed?
We're getting to that, hold on.
We have almost $1.6 million that we have to make whole, and we'll get in probably $1 million to $1.1 million. So we'll be in the hole for $500,000 or $600,000.
And that's current year, not current year expenses.
That's correct. That's on page 23 of the financial report this afternoon for the period ending February 28th.
Yeah, Scott, can you put that one page back up? And I think my follow-up to that would be, what is your plan for that 600,000?
To fund it from the operating surplus.
Right, it'll have to be, that has to be mitigated by any surplus that we have this year.
What are the expenses that you don't anticipate are going to be covered by the reimbursement? Because that would be the other 1.7 million. So you have 1.7 million plus another million in the CRF grants. So what of these are not reimbursable? I'm sorry, I feel like I'm shouting. I didn't mean that.
I think everything that you have there listed as COVID is technically reimbursable, but we only get $2.1 million back. So it'll be that $500,000 or $600,000 that I think Mr. Hendrickson just mentioned that we won't get reimbursed for, if I'm understanding your question.
Well, but we just said that there's 3.4 million in outstanding grant money. So will that be able to be covered for these expenses?
No. Those, okay. So you're talking about, now you're adding the ESSER 2 and the America Recovers Act, right?
Yeah.
Right, so these expenses for 2021 will not be covered by the ESSER 2 grant. The ESSER 2 grant, as we said before, is supposed to cover remediation, social emotional learning. These funds are typically around PPE, safety equipment, that kind of stuff. So very different. The CRF funds were all about getting schools open and in a safe way.
So is the money that's outstanding, the things that the expenses you're not having covered, are those things like computers, technology?
That's some of it, yeah. There was an ESSER 1 grant that did allow us to cover some technology. That was approximately
171,000 or 127,000, one of those?
127 was the number. So we used all that for all a chunk of, but not all of the technology that was purchased. So we bought a lot of technology. It was before I came on, but a lot of technology was bought in the summer in order to get classrooms off the ground. Every child needed to have a Chromebook. So there was a lot of purchases that way. A lot of cameras were purchased, and not all of that could we get reimbursed for.
Okay. When you send over the summary of the grant money that's coming in, can you also send a summary of what hasn't been covered by grant money?
Yeah, so COVID-related expenses not covered by grant money?
Yeah, so if you could break it up this way for us, I think this would be helpful. If you could say expenses that have already been covered and what money was used to cover it, expenses that weren't covered, and then the future grant money that you're expecting, and what you anticipate you will use that money for. I think that's okay?
Yeah, I do have some meetings coming up to talk more specifically about how we're going to use those funds. So I'm meeting with my leadership teams and my building principals. So it would be, at this time, it'll be more general in terms of how we're going to use those funds as we develop our more specific plan.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Scott, I really appreciate you putting that up on the screen. It was much easier to be able to follow that way. Michael Barker, thank you for being patient.
No problem. Thank you all so much for all of the answers to our questions, all the analysis live this evening. This has been better reporting and better answering of questions than any other of this kind of convening that I've been on this board for. So I want to really thank you before I ask my question. And I think it's an easy one. So you referenced in your deck, and you've referenced previously, the operations director position as being something that you would not hire if you did not receive the funding request that you put forward. And tonight you made a statement about there would be no long range planning, which sounds catastrophic. And I wondered if you could just give a little more detail to that so that we understand what sorts of long range planning we would be foregoing as an education system if that person wasn't hired.
Yeah, I think that's I'm not sure if that would classify that as an easy question, Mr. Barker, but I'll do my best to
Maybe
answer.
easier than the math stuff. All right.
Right. So, you know, the leadership position, like a director of operations, is going to be looking at things like energy efficiency type projects. That's one of the major things. So, we're looking at the Middlebrook roof right now. So I know in the Middlebrook committee, they've talked about, well, what about solar panels? Should solar panels be put on there? Well, that's something that a director of operations would dig into, work with companies to see if that would make financial sense. Would it make more sense to put them on top of the roof? Would it make more sense to put them out on the property somewhere? Those are all types of questions that a director of operations would be doing. That's just one example. We have a number of lighting projects I believe we can do in this particular district. I believe there's a number of other energy efficiency type programs we could do in this district. The fact that I say I think we could do is that we haven't had anybody in this position all since I've been here. And so I don't know. I actually don't know what exists, what we can do, what we can't do. So some of that longer range planning, like those are just some examples are pieces of that. When it comes to the capital improvement plan, you know, John Morello, myself, Paul Hendrickson, we did the best we could to put that together with some other folks. But again, the director of operations should be spending a lot more time digging into a lot of those details and making sure that they look at everything, and even talking to the town side to say, how can we collectively work together to try to find some efficiencies that would work for both the town and for the Board of Education side. So those are some of the pieces, plus someone to actually supervise maintenance and custodial. We don't have anybody technically doing that right now. Working on the budget for the maintenance department, there's nobody technically doing that. So we had to step up, John Morello had to step up, Paul had to get involved with that. So there's a number of things like that. And if you look at the director of operations, we put together a job description for the person in our original budget packet, and it was in the section 2. So you can look to see other things that we're talking about. So we're definitely feeling the effects of not having this person here as a director of operations, and we think it'd be very valuable to add.
Thank you.
Okay, just a piggyback on that is when we're talking about efficiencies. So one of the things that we have been talking about on the town side of the budget is some technology upgrades on the town side that help with workflow, talking about whether or not they might go to, now I can't think of it, instead of having individual server, the virtual desktops, that's it. So some of those things. One of the things that we had talked about last year was that our Munis system, that you guys pay for a Munis license and we also pay for a Munis license, that there could be a savings of like $165,000 to $170,000 if we combined systems. What would it take to do that from your end, Paul?
That's the first I've heard of it, and I would have to get together with Jeff Hackett to discuss it and see what the implementation would require.
Okay.
This is the first I've heard of it.
Okay. I know it was discussed last year a little bit. I know that there's some issues with account, what your accounts are called, but it would allow information transfer to be instantaneous so that you would have your separate system within our system. So I will ask that some information and questions that you would need to follow up on be looked at to see if that's something that we could accomplish, so that we could have one license for that. And I know you guys are also looking at implementing your time clock system.
We're in the process of doing that. We had a call on Wednesday. We have Wednesday calls for an hour at least. And I'm an active participant now. So we're moving forward on schedule for implementation of the time by July 1st.
Okay.
Laney, just to mention the Munis accounts and the uniform chart of accounts, that is not something that we could just do overnight. That would take, I think, several months. Paul and I have talked about that. Because I think, I'm not an accountant, but obviously codes need to know codes. They need to understand each other so that when money transfers, they know what happened. So that would take some time. That would not be a July 1st kind of thing.
That's okay. Not everything has to happen July 1. I think that sometimes we talk about ideas in concept, and then during budget season, we get, some great ideas on the table. And then because it's complicated, or because we don't have manpower, or because it's something that just didn't take priority, we wait and we talk about it again at the next budget season. So I think that's something I'd really like to see us follow up on. And as we're looking for efficiencies, there's a few things on the town side that we've asked for people to look at. We've asked them to look at their goals mid-year and to, talk about things that they've requested at budget time, so that we're not waiting till the next budget season to say, oh, but we can't do that before the budget is finalized. So it's okay if it doesn't happen in the next cycle, but at least we've got that conversation going, because I think there are things that long-term make a lot of sense, and they might not be the easiest to do, but why should we double pay for a system like that?
Sure.
So that's a good way to look at that. Does anybody else have other questions about any of those expenses? There was some follow-up information about the UI incentives with the lighting project at the high school. And I just wanted to clarify two things on that. Vin, where are you, Vin? I lost you on my screen.
I'm here somewhere.
Oh, good. One of the questions that we asked was to provide detail on the lighting project at THS and the Agroscience Center. The work was completed at THS and at the Ag Science Center, and the outlay to the Board of Ed at this point was $546,000. But I know with the incentives, when it had been set up, I know there was some confusion with the change in administration that the out-of-pocket would have been much less than that. I know that you made payments. Do we have it in the works to correct what was out of pocket? Will you be being reimbursed for that?
Well, in the actual document, they refer to their $250,000 interest-free loan as decreasing our out-of-pocket expenses. I don't know about you, but I always had to pay my mortgage back. So if we got a $250,000 loan, we have to pay that back. So our anticipated out-of-pocket is $345,734. We've contacted UI to start the process to get the incentive payments.
Okay, Vin, do you have some follow-up on that?
Yeah, I had two questions actually. I was looking at your summary year-to-date and spend. What account was that paid out of? 546.
It's the energy account, and Object 415, it's account 01842611-57202.
Okay, I'm looking at it and I guess expended year to date was 833,205, so it's in that number?
Let me see, I'm bouncing back and forth between. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then the other question I had about this is that the Ag Center was also eligible for a UI incentive. Was that filed for and received?
That's in the same conversation we're having with UI to get both those incentives at once. The incentive for the Agroscience was $22,486,000, and Trumbull High School's incentive was $195,275.
It actually, they both were, they were increased after they actually looked at it, but it's pretty close to the numbers. So when you do get this potential rebate from UI, how is that going to be applied, in what account, and how is it going to be applied?
It's going to be applied in that account.
So you'll be getting 217,000 from them and a credit, I would think.
Yes, and a credit to that account that I just named.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Then did that satisfy the questions that we asked? We're all good with that?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Mr. Cinto, you had asked some questions on numbers of students who had been out of the school system due to COVID, gone to private school. Did their answers take care of your questions? We lose Tony? Okay, I will assume that they took care of his questions. Does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to talk about? Marty?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to say I'm so pleased with how you came back with all this information. I really think this was excellent, and I really appreciate the time and energy you guys put into this. I'm still, I know you have the writing here. I just want to make sure I understand it on question 13 with regard to the insurance. When we came across this last time was the first time I understood that the retirees increase is different than the other negotiation for everybody else. So, and sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
And then I thought I read in here that for some reason it only applies to the school employees, not to the town employees. Can you just elaborate on, because I thought they're in the same plan. So I just am trying to wrap my head around this. Can you help me understand this a little bit better?
They're in the same plan, but retirees by, I think it is Connecticut General Statutes 10-283T can participate in a health plan, and it has to be equivalent to what the teachers, the active teachers are getting. And so we do a weighted average or blended rate of all participants, and that blended rate is what is paid. The retirees.
The 4.2?
100%.
And that blended was the reason why it was 4.2 instead of 4%, is that right?
That is correct.
And then I just want to make, while we're here and while Maria is here, Maria, this does not apply then to the town? We don't have a separate retiree schedule health insurance for our town?
Marty, the teachers don't have the same retirement plan. They're on the state plan, correct?
Yeah.
I think that's the way it works, because teachers don't participate with the town plans. So the teacher retirement is a state contract, and the state says that they have to, what their portion of putting in, they're just all part of the same plan because we all have the same insurance plan, but their retirees are treated different than our retirees. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I guess that's it for me. I didn't understand that previously. Thank you for elaborating.
Do I get bonus points for having something like learn something? This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Any other questions so far? Mr. Barker? Are you good?
I just
Do you
have
have
one
some-
more thing if there's time.
Yep, I think we're good. I think we hit all the other questions we were looking for, and I'll try to
Marty,
compile
maybe.
that follow-up.
I'm sorry, I did have the one last question, and maybe you can just help me understand this piece, where I guess I'm a little not, and I know you're going to come back with the one pager for us on the grants, and I appreciate that. With all this additional money coming in from these new grants that are coming, I guess what I'm not understanding is why are these grants not going to enable you to do all the things that you wanted to do with the first selectman's proposed budget? Aren't the additional grants giving you enough money to accommodate all these other things? Because when we spoke previously, we didn't know if the federal government was going to have this program in place or not. So now we're speaking later, you're going to get significantly more money than you were when we spoke last time. And what I'm trying to understand is why that additional money, coupled with what the first selectman proposed, doesn't enable you to get done, get done.
I do think, I understand why that question would come up, and I think it's a fair question. To me, there's a couple of pieces here. One, that money is going to run out and create a cliff, right, a couple of years from now. So we could say it could be used to accomplish some of the things that we want to do, but not all of them. So the other thing to think about is we want to start rebuilding back our staff so that it's appropriate without that grant money, because that grant money is going to run out and you're not going to want to add all this back in 1 year. You are not going to want to do this. And this is a multi-year grant. So while I agree, I would likely be able to afford some math and literacy specialists using this grant money and perhaps some tutoring and things like that. We're going to need more than what we would traditionally need. So I'm still suggesting that the request that we're making for the 21-22 budget is still appropriate. And then these funds would help round out what's needed for our students over the next coming years. And again, like I said, I would be worried about a funding cliff if we simply relied on the grant money, and then in a couple of years we'll be decimated because that grant money won't be present. And I won't be able to use the grant money to hire a HR director or to hire a director of operations. Those are not remediation type funds. There's going to be quite a bit of costs, I would imagine, to remediate. You're going to be talking about students with special needs who have that remediation, but just we're going to see more kids than we've ever seen need that support. And so our current structure doesn't support it. The grants will help. And we were still requesting this operational budget as well. So again, I think it's a fair question, but it doesn't cover everything and it creates future problems.
Thank you for that response. I do understand that. I guess what I was thinking for certain aspects that are kind of one-time shots, whether it's on the supply side or other elements, that money would take care of that. But thank you for your response. I hear where you're coming from.
Okay.
I think that's the one piece of follow-up we also asked for was any one-time expenditures that could be taken care of with either grant money or surplus. Do you happen to have some list of that put together?
We don't right now, but we are starting to talk about that, because if this year's surplus ends up being more than what we're currently predicting, then we would want to start talking about other options to make sure, first and foremost, all of our debts are cleared. We'd love to be able to end the year without any additional debts back to the town. This is speaking for myself and Paul right now. Like you heard, we would need to make these recommendations to the Board of Education. We would look at other opportunities, we've talked about even looking at our TD loans, because our TD loans, if partially paid back or paid back would reduce future payments. And those future payments would help help out our budget, not just in 1 year out, but multiple years out. And then we would be looking at things potentially like technology that we could purchase now with surplus money. There's some curriculum items we might be able to purchase now with surplus money, but first and foremost, we want to make sure our deficits are cleared. We want to take care of things that we owe money to. But we are planning on, just in case we have additional money, ways we could help out next year's budget. I hope I answered your question. You're asking.
Okay. I think we'd like to hear more about that also. That would be helpful. I think that would answer to Marty's question as well. Mark Mascola, did you have a question about administrative staff costs?
No, lady. I'm still putting together the question. I will. Okay. I'll come back. Thanks.
Awesome. Okay, so I didn't miss anybody else's questions. We're good there. Michael, I think that you were next when Marty just wanted to get that one last one in, and then it kind of.
I'm on.
All right.
Michael Barker, Board of Finance. I want to reiterate, thank you so much again for all of the great analysis that you provided for us, the additional information and the stuff that you've agreed to provide this evening. Since I asked last time, I wanted to bring up the request for the MOU that we sent over a few weeks ago. I want to say thank you for the letter that we received back. I also want to say I think that the activities that you have engaged in around the management audit have been largely productive, certainly more transparent than we have been used to, and I really think it's moving in a great direction. I'd like to request, just because it did come up in a public meeting last time, that you just lay out the process of that response. The advice that you received from council not to engage in an MOU and instead engage in this way, and the steps that you're taking, because I think they're good steps, and I think the folks listening at home need to hear about them.
Oh, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure. So you want us to lay out the steps for you tonight?
Well, not so much for me. I know what the steps are. I got the letter. But because it was a letter from one board to another, and there are folks watching at home, I just would like for you to lay that out for them, because I think they're good steps and important steps, and it would be useful for folks to have that read into the record.
Right. So I think I don't have any notes in front of me on that particular topic, but I'll tell you what I know we're doing, and then Paul can fill in some specifics. First and foremost, we did take all of the recommendations from the audit. I think there was 66 or so recommendations. We put them in a Google Doc for ourselves, laid out with what the recommendation is, and then specifically what we've accomplished so far on that particular recommendation, who's responsible for that recommendation, and when we're expecting to complete it, or it already has a completion date. So there's a status area in there as well. Each month, Mr. Hendrickson will go to the Finance Committee and report out where they are with the recommendations. Actually, more specifically, it goes to the full board. The full board gets the first meeting of every month, there'll be a discussion about that operational review and a review of that document to give some status updates. And that document then gets placed onto our website as well. So anybody who's interested in knowing where we are with any of those recommendations can go up to our website and take a look at that. So that, in a nutshell, is our way of trying to make sure we're extremely transparent about what we need to do and what our plan is to accomplish it. And I forget the exact numbers, but Mr. Hendrickson and his team have been doing great work on that, and they've got a significant % of these recommendations already accomplished. Does that answer your question, Mr. Barker?
Most of it, and this may be more of a question for the Board of Ed and the chairman there. If you could just speak, someone could just speak to why we made the determination not to enter into an MOU.
I'll answer that.
Okay.
In working with, I had reached out to board counsel because from my perspective, and I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, the Board of Finance does not govern the Board of Education. The Board of Finance does not have authority over the Board of Education. And so there was my perception of that. When I reached out to board counsel, he absolutely agreed that we shouldn't be getting into what would be considered a legal document with the Board of Finance. So at the same time, we recognize our desire to collaborate. I think we've done nothing but show our willingness to collaborate with the Board of Finance. Clearly, there was issues that needed to be resolved, but signing on to an MOA was not necessary.
Great. Does the chairman have a similar point of view?
I have to agree. I feel that our sub-finance committee now is asking all the right questions. We are receiving a slew of documents, all correct documents that we can review, and all our information is up on the website. Paul and Marty have been available for questions at any time any board member calls them with any question. So I feel we're moving forward and we feel we're in a good place. We've made adjustments to the chart that Paul made, and I think we're doing a great job. And Marty said he didn't remember, I think off the top of my head, 40 of the 66 recommendations were completed. There are 21 in progress, and I think only 5 remain unaddressed. That's what was in the letter. I can't remember anything else that was in the letter right now, but I think we're in a good place right now. Thank you.
Yeah, I will certainly agree that we are in a better place than we were, certainly a good place going forward. I only take issue with the characterization that the MOU intended that the Board of Finance would govern anything on the Board of Ed side. That was never the intention. We were very explicit about that. But in any case, I really appreciate the response. I think that we can move forward in this collaborative way, and thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Steve, I see your hand up, sir.
Hey, Lainey. I just want to say, sorry, I apologize for my voice. I'm actually recovering from COVID still, so if I sound funny, I apologize. I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Semmel and Mr. Henriksen for everything they've done. Being very transparent and very honest with their answers. I could say thank you very much for that. And I hope that the upcoming budget or the school year is even better. So thank you so much for everything.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Anyone else? Okay. So just before we close for the evening, a couple of announcements. I just want to make sure that everybody watching at home knows that we have 2 chances for the public to speak to the Board of Finance and the Town Council Finance Committee. Our public hearings will be held this Saturday morning at 10 a.m. and again Tuesday the 23rd at 7 p.m. Available on Zoom. You can find the link on our website. Just click on for as an attendee. If you raise your hand, there's instructions to do so. You'll be taken in the order that the hands are raised. And we'll allot 2 hours for questions or comments. Just understand that the board does not respond during that time. If you wish to email comments, you may do so to pcollier, PCOLLIER, @trumbull-ct.gov to our clerk or to directly to my email, which is lainiemchugh@gmail.com. I have 2 I's in my name, L-A-I and I-E. That's often why mail does not get to me, and it's all my mother's fault, but we won't have to worry about that. Now, that was the first thing. So I wanted to make sure everybody knew about those public hearings. I also wanted to take a minute and acknowledge some of the members of the Board of... I also wanted to take a moment and acknowledge a couple of members of the Board of Finance who've really stepped up and done some amazing work. Mark Mascola has been a great addition to our board. He's offered some really great down-to-earth analysis and perspective. And I really want to thank him for doing that. He's taken time to go through a lot of the numbers that just didn't seem to make sense and really broke it down for us. I appreciate that. And I also wanted to say thank you to Vin DiGennaro. As always, he's been more than willing to help us understand the financing on some of the technology loans, as well as their performance contracting, and making sure that we're all on track and understanding that. And he's now stepped up to chair the building committee, which will be taking care of the roof at Middlebrook. So thank you, Vin and Mark. That's a lot of extra time outside of our meetings. I do appreciate it. If nobody else has any further questions this evening, I just want to thank everybody for being on this call.
Queenie?
And yeah.
I had said that I was hoping I could get just a couple minutes at the very end just to do a final remark.
You sure may.
So, okay. I felt like you were about to sign off and ask for a motion to adjourn. I just wanted to jump in. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay, because I probably would have done it by unanimous consent now that I know what that means, and then we would have been out of here. So I'm glad you stopped me.
It's just going to be another minute, I promise. And I'm just going to throw up a last slide if you don't mind. So my last slide from tonight was just to give you some final thoughts. And I want to say thank you to all the board of finance members. I really appreciate the intelligence that you bring to this. I can tell you're just trying to do what's right by the town and ask the right questions. I can tell you when we built this budget, it was from the ground up. Salaries, benefits, transportation, accounts for 87.5% of our budget. I showed you tonight, again, that what we're really asking for is a nominal increase, given all the other required increases we have. We talked about the town surplus tonight. I mean, the surplus we're expecting to have, which will put the town in a better position than you would have expected to be at the end of this year. So I think that impact on your general fund should be considered. I also want to make sure that you're aware that you should not see a link between this year's surplus and next year's request. There's a lot of things going on in this particular budget, including a grant of $2.1 million for CRF that's impacting our overall surplus. So I would hate for you to think that because we have a surplus this year, that means there's a built-in surplus for next year. That is not the case. And so I'll just end by saying I really would like you to consider funding the full request of the 3.81%. I really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's a lot for us to all sit down and to talk about moving forward before we get to our vote. There's a lot of moving pieces, and in no way do we think that this year's surplus would be how we want to look at next year's budget, because I don't think that we were confident in the numbers from this year's budget to start with. So it was really helpful to break it down and to look at it more as starting from scratch. So thank you for that. Anyone else have a question? Anything else? Okay, then I'm going to take unanimous consent that everybody wants to go home, or actually you're already home, that you just want to turn your computers off and maybe have a little fun. So have a great night. Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Thank you, everyone.